I love how we can choose our own adventure through quilting and textiles. Not only can we make, we can design, but some dive deep into research, then share their knowledge through lectures, books, and magazines. Today's guest is Teresa Duryea Wong, who not only is a multi-published author, but also lectures on quilting around the world. And she is going to tell us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea. Here's my interview with Teresa Duryea Wong. Welcome, Teresa, to the show. Whereabouts in the world are you coming to us from?
I'm in Houston.
Are you from Houston? Are you from Texas?
I'm born and raised here. Not too many of us, but yeah, this is home for me. Actually, it's a great city. Very diverse, wonderful food. You can get anywhere from here.
Well, I think Texas has more quilters than any other place in the world. Like, I think US has probably 65% of the quilters in the world, and 65% of them are in Texas.
That's probably true. I mean, it's a huge state, but I think I would add the sort of Midwest to that. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, also a lot of quilters here.
So what came first for you? The writing, the quilting, or the research?
Definitely the quilting first. I had a corporate job for a long time, so I was in a completely different industry. I started quilting in the sort of late 1890s. My best friend taught me how. I just started, as a quilter, and I just loved it.
According to your bio, you traveled all over the world. Were you living in those positions, or were you just traveling?
Just traveling. So I worked in the oil and gas industry because if you're in Houston and you want to work, there's a good chance that's where you're going to work. One of the largest employers in Houston for sure. It's a very big industry. So I spent about 20 some years in the oil and gas industry and kind of worked my way up the ladder. And as I got up higher and higher, I spent more and more time traveling. So it was all travel out and back. I think I counted about 45 countries at one time. So I was traveling about, I don't know, maybe 60% of the time. And yeah, wherever there's oil, I've probably been there.
So you've been to Canada a lot.
I've been to Canada many times, even up into the Northwest Territories. Of course, Calgary many, many times, and all of West. I've been to Toronto as well, and Nova Scotia actually too for work. All over, I've been to Saudi, been to Dubai, been to Vietnam, been to East Texas, been to West Texas a lot. Pretty much everywhere.
We've got a small little area in Ontario that pumps oil.
Yeah.
Arnie in that. I keep forgetting that we have it here, but we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And Western Canada is very prolific, of course.
While you were doing all this traveling, was textiles even on your mind?
I was still quilting. And to be honest, for about 15 years, I hand quilted. So I loved it because it's actually something that you could take with you. I had a lot of plane rides, hand quilting, sitting there doing my hand quilting and some hand embroidery or hand applique work. And of course, I have two kids. And, when they were young, I could take it with me whenever I was going to do all of their activities as well. But about 10 years ago or so, I bought a fancy sewing machine. That just kind of changed everything. And now I only machine quilt. And I have a domestic machine and I have a long arm machine as well. And I enjoyed those hand quilting years, but I also love the machine, maybe even more.
Now, in those early years, you were also a publisher of a fine art magazine.
Yeah. So that came before corporate. So I actually started as a journalist. I started working in television out of college. My husband still works in television, and that's where we met. And I worked there about 8 years or so in the CBS affiliate for Houston. I did all kinds of jobs, including I was on the air as a arts reporter. And then I started this art magazine and I ran that for a couple of years, which was really lovely. I call it my MBA years because I learned a lot in a crash course. I did freelance writing for newspapers and magazines, and that's what got me into the corporate oil and gas work. And then that all ended in 2013. And when I left the corporate world, I said that was enough. That's when I really started doing the research. I was already enrolled as a student at Rice University, which is a really big sort of Ivy League of the South school in Houston. And I was getting a master's in liberal studies, which is, I was focused on art history and music history. That's where I really learned how to do formal research. And I just decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going back to the corporate world anymore. I'm done. I'm going to follow my passion and start researching and writing about quilts.
So, leaving the corporate world, was that something that you had planned when your kids were off to college, or was it just one day you just thought, I've had enough?
Yeah, no, it wasn't really planned. The company eliminated my job and half my department as those things happened. So it was kind of a shock. First, I thought, well, I'll just go back. And then I thought, this is like a gift. Take it. I think it was because I was already going to night school at Rice. It was just like the perfect moment to make this big pivot and think about what I wanted to do. And that's really when I started on Japan. So I had already been kind of a groupie of Japanese quilts and fabrics. So,
They are so gorgeous.
yeah.
And so I've been fascinated every time I touch on it, from the way that they learn through a mentor as opposed to going to quilting classes, to their love of small little things. But you've written two books on quilting in Japan. Like, had you been to Japan beforehand?
When I started researching, I had not been there when I first started, but I went immediately. So I went. My first trip was in January of 2014, and then my book came out in 2015. And the first book tells really that history of quilting in Japan, like how it took hold and how Japanese quilters learned the art form. That was just so amazing and so much fun. And I've continued going to Japan. I go every year. And I have a second book. I had so much information for the first one that I couldn't fit it all. So I did a second book, which is slightly different, called Cotton and Indigo from Japan. And that one I talk all about the folk textiles and how they're made and show all these beautiful quilts that are made with antique cotton. I also went into the textile mills and tried to explain why all the finest quilting cotton comes from Japan. And it's just a really fascinating story.
They
And
also have wonderful accessories that come from Japan.
everything is fabulous in Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, the tools, Clover, of course, is a Japanese company. The rotary cutter, Olfa, was invented in Japan. So much technology has come out of there that we just rely on every day. It's just a beautiful place. The people are amazing. And really, all of the quilters that I've met, even the ones that are doing like contemporary fiber art, they're all really seeking this perfection. It's all about the search for this flawless art, which is so unlike the Western aesthetic. My aesthetic, especially, is not seeking perfection. I just want to have fun and I enjoy the process. And if it's not perfect, that's okay with me. So it's just a very, very different approach.
So tell me about your new book. Now, do you pronounce this as, it looks like it rhymes with
Yeah.
Hawaii.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a preview copy that just came out. And so it's Kawaii, applique quilts from Japan. Kawaii is a word that's ubiquitous in Japan. It's used constantly. It has a couple of meanings. It kind of means tiny and cute, but it also means cool and chic and kind of hip. So we're calling these Kawaii applique quilts, and these are quilts with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 tiny, tiny pieces of applique.
So there's two groups of people out there, the people that are going, oh my God, no, and other people going, wow, yay.
Exactly. Yes. So, I mean, some of these they're all like story quilts. So they're all telling, Japanese stories. Like, I don't know if you can see this, but like, here's one. Thousands and thousands of tiny pieces of applique on these. So we feature 6 quilters. and master quilters, and we show you all beautiful detail photos of their quilts because you got to see the close-ups in a book like this. And then we have some history explaining why the Japanese are so attached to these tiny things, which is really interesting.
I would like to get the book just to see more detail.
Yeah.
Lovely. Are they dolls or are they ladies?
They're kimono girls, kind of like dolls. They could be dolls or girls. And that is a project in the book also. This is the first time I've ever done a book with patterns. So this one has 5 patterns in the back. And so you can learn how to make that quilt yourself.
I have another author on this
Yes.
one. How was it like working with a partner?
It was wonderful. So, Naomi Ichikawa, she is Japanese, and we've known each other for about 10 years. And she's kind of a veteran of the Japanese magazine publishing world. She's been working in quilt magazines for like 30 years. And she started her own magazine about 4 years ago, and she asked me to write for her. So that's where we kind of reconnected. Of course, I was writing in English, and she was translating my articles in her magazine. And then she folded that magazine, and then we had the idea to do this book together. We both were very big fans of Yoko Tsukita, and she is one of the quilters featured in our book. So we kind of had that shared love. Yoko Tsukita was featured in my first book as well. So
Wow.
we kind of expanded the idea from there. And it was really, really interesting because we have such different views. And so, like, we wrote history, like, she wrote like an essay at the beginning, and then I wrote another essay. So it's like the insider perspective and the traveler's perspective, kind of looking at the same issue. So I think it'll be fun for people to read.
So how much Japanese do you speak now?
I don't speak it. I mean, I know some words and phrases. What's amazing about Japan is that lots and lots of people speak English. And if they don't, somebody nearby does. So there's I've interviewed probably 100 different people, and I would say half of them speak English. And for the other half, either someone in their family or I travel with a translator. But
I'm
the
going.
transportation and everything is bilingual, and it's so easy to get around.
Yes, we're lucky that our first language is English because if it was German or Italian, we wouldn't be so blessed with all these
Exactly.
bilingual.
Yes.
And I follow this YouTube channel by this gentleman who interviews Americans living in Japan, or
Uh-huh.
like their third or fourth generation living in Japan. So they speak it fluently, but they look Western. And I've also seen him interview Japanese people who have come back to Japan and speak it. And it's quite interesting. Some days I'll just go down a rabbit hole listening to all this interesting cultural differences between the countries.
Yes. Yeah, it is very, very interesting.
You also are a contributor to Quiltfolk magazine.
Correct.
How
Yeah.
long have you been doing that?
I think going on 4 years. And I simply adore working with them. I started at the magazine when they had a new managing editor. Brianna Briggs came on, and she brought me in. And so I write for every issue. And I usually write a bunch, like 3 or 4 articles, 2 to 3 or 4, whatever. And sometimes I travel with the photographers, which is super, super fun. But a lot of times we just do the interviews by Zoom, and Quiltfolk features one state at a time, unless you're in Texas where we might need, 5 issues, maybe 4. But yeah, it's lovely because it's a great mix of, famous people and, not famous people, and museums and people that are sort of quilt adjacent. And it's just a really, really great mix of people. And I enjoy, connecting with so many quilters and getting to know them and tell their stories.
Yes, I was just looking at some of your articles in the New Mexico version.
Uh-huh.
And not only was there an amazing First Nations woman, but there was, you know her name because she's a friend of yours.
Terry Hancock Mangit?
Terry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. She is amazing. And yeah, she's been there in Taos for a long time. And yeah, she's a force. And
Right.
so influential in the art quilt movement in the early days too.
they struggled in those days for respectability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me about the quilt that you have behind you?
This quilt behind me is I've for the last couple of years I've been on a I don't know, a project, I guess you would call it. I've been collecting antique quilt tops and finishing them on my long arm. And I'm actually working on a book on this topic. So I've done about 20.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had an exhibition at the a solo exhibition of them at the International Quilt Festival in Houston in November with 11 of them, and I've just shipped off 10 to the International Quilt Museum at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and they're going to do a small exhibition too. And then next year I have an exhibition at the Texas Quilt Museum. I think it's just fun. I really enjoy the process of machine quilting, and I love sort of bringing this old patchwork to life. I am saving them, but it's not the reason I'm doing it. So it's not like the most romantic reason. I just love the process. And in the end, I'm also saving them. And I like to encourage people to do that because I feel like there's a lot of people that have old quilt tops sitting on the floor in their closet and they don't know what to do with it. I have so many people who tell me that they have them and they're afraid to machine quilt them because they feel like they should be hand quilted to sort of honor, the antique value. And I get that. But if you're never going to hand quilt it, you know, it's not going to get done. So why, I think that my grandmother and her mother would have loved to have had a machine like mine. And they would have loved to use a machine like mine. So they hand quilted because it was, necessity. So I don't know. In my book, I think it's finished is better than an old quilt top sitting on the floor in the closet. And I don't think that the next generation, when we're gone, is going to have value for a lot of these old tops. So I love to see them get finished.
I got three tops from a friend who got them out of a closet when somebody had passed. I think it was a great aunt, and they were somebody else's that had ended up at her. And finally, I quilted them. But it took me a while because they were all frayed on the edges. And
Yeah,
I didn't want to fix it. And suddenly I realized nobody even knows about this. They have no clue what size this quilt is.
yeah,
Let's get it done.
yeah.
Do you have any tips for people working with that old fabric?
I mean, I do try to find quilts that are in fairly good shape. I don't like to spend a lot of time like doing repair, just because it's not as fun as the quilting. But occasionally I do repair them or I maybe adjust them so they lay flat. So I think my suggestion is that I feel like I use a lot of silk thread because I think it's more gentle. I don't use any synthetics, but other people do. And some of the, threads that glide really smoothly are also really good. And I also use cotton thread as well. I think it's just a matter of just respecting the patchwork. And I think, that's my tip is just have fun with it. And, once it's quilted, it's secure. It's not going anywhere. The patchwork's not going to come apart. It's just becomes something much more beautiful, usable if you choose to use it. And I know a lot of people think that you're destroying the value when you have changed an antique or vintage object like that. And yes, that's correct. You have changed the value. But what value does it have sitting on the floor of someone's closet?
I think it has a higher chance of getting thrown out.
Definitely. That's my feeling exactly.
So, on top of your books, do you have lectures or workshops that you do?
Yes, I have several lectures. I actually lecture a lot. I don't teach any workshops. I got to stay in my wheelhouse. I don't think I have the knowledge or patience to teach necessarily. But so my lectures are like kind of like art history. So I have several lectures about Japan, and I'm developing a new one on this book with Naomi. It'll be a joint lecture with Naomi on video and me live and hopefully in person. And I have, a lecture on my Native American quilt history that I gave recent, a book that I finished. Gosh, almost 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago. Yeah, I just really enjoy lecturing and educating people in a way that's kind of fun and interesting. And I love this idea of taking what we think we know about quilt history and really kind of expanding that and blowing it up, in a way, in a good way.
When you propose a lecture to QuiltCon, have you already done all the research and everything to go with it, or you do that after the idea gets accepted?
Kind of yes and no. QuiltCon is a little bit of a weird bird because you have to apply about 15 months ahead of the lecture. So you have to apply like three months before QuiltCon comes. So it's really difficult to work that far in advance. QuiltCon also wants something new. So you can't really, most lectures that are accepted are either debuted at QuiltCon or one that you haven't really given very often. In fact, there's rules about you can't give it 60 days before, 60 days after. So I spend a long time researching my lectures. It's not unusual for me to spend 6 months or 8 months or even a year on researching a lecture before I give it to the public. So I do a ton of research, reading books, but I also read a lot of academic journals. I'll read a lot of things that are adjacent to that period of history so that I understand it fully. And I do a lot of interviews and I go out and see as many quilts as I can. Like for my history of Native American quilting or First Nation quilting, I mean, that was several years in the making. And I went all over the US to see quilts and study quilts. And that's pretty typical of what I do for research. It's pretty exhaustive, but I just love it. Can't get enough of it.
So, are you holding yourself into a particular area of research when you get into all these topics, or you just go down whatever rabbit hole you want to?
I was really fixated on Japan for, 5 or 6 years, and that was my whole focus. And after I finished my second book on Japan, I really thought I wanted to expand, and I really thought I should look at my own country. And I was familiar with star quilts in the indigenous communities in the US, and I thought I really started kind of digging into that. And it doesn't happen right away. Like, I don't just wake up and say, I want to do this or do that. It just takes time, I think. So as I start digging into something, and I've started a lot of ideas that didn't really go anywhere, because it's just not enough, or the information is too esoteric, maybe, or, I have to feel like there's a really rich story there to get in. And that's really what happened with the Native American quilting. And then I wrote another book about American cotton, and that one, ironically, also came out of my Japan research because, so, it's just like one thing always leads to another, right? Well, I was in Japan and I was studying cotton in Japan, and I was talking to these manufacturers, and I went into a cotton warehouse in Osaka, and I'm standing there in front of these giant bales of cotton in this textile warehouse in Osaka, and the bale says it's from Bryan College Station, Texas, which is like 50 miles from my house. And I knew about America's cotton, but it sort of like hits you like a ton of bricks. And so I said, oh my God. And Texas produces 50% of America's cotton crop. That standing there, that moment just led me to 2 years of research on American cotton and what's happening on American cotton farms today. So, that's how, kind of an example of something that happened very suddenly, but mostly things take a long time to sort of evolve and work their way in.
I notice a lot of times you're pairing yourself up with David Hastings. When did you meet David, and what do you like to do together?
Yeah, so we have presented and still present to a lot of guilds co-lectures. So David and I met at QuiltCon a long time ago, I would say about 8 years ago. I've been to every QuiltCon except the first one, and maybe one other one I did not go to, but I've been to almost all of them. Anyway, we met. We shared a love of Japan. I was giving a lecture on Japan, and he came up to me afterwards and started talking to me, and we just kind of hit it off. We have a very similar aesthetic, and we always try to meet at QuiltCon and hang out. And one year we just started brainstorming, what we could do together. So we have done a couple of different lectures. We have one lecture on what were the early quilts that influenced the modern quilting movement. Like, what were 10 works of art that were really influential around 2010, 11, 12, when the modern quilting movement was just getting started. And we chose international quilts, and we gave that lecture, and that was really, really fun and well received. Then that led to a second one, and we decided to do 20 quilts from around the world, modern quilts from places that you wouldn't expect to find quilting, so not the major markets. So we did Korea and Guatemala and Argentina, and it was just really fascinating. And we've continued to give those lectures to guilds all over Canada and the US.
He doesn't live in Texas either, does he?
No, no, he lives up in Sequim in Washington State, so out on Puget Sound, Pacific Northwest, and I was out there last July for several lectures, and I stayed with David, and we just had so much fun. He's just a wonderful person. He's such a great teacher. He's so kind and patient and talented. We just have this very similar aesthetic. We both love Marcia Durst fabric. We both love minimalism. So we're both fans of like Carson Converse and all
Oh, she's
different.
amazing.
Yeah, she is amazing. So it's just very similar vibe. And I just have treasured the opportunity to be around him and work with him over the years.
Have you passed on your love of quilts and textiles to anybody in your family?
Neither one of my kids do. I have two adult kids, but my daughter is got married about 3 years ago, and her husband has become an art quilter. So I'm super excited. Someone in the family cares. They live in Manhattan, but they come here, for holidays. And they came during the pandemic when New York was so, such an awful place to be. So even before they got married, they came here that first year. We kind of built a bubble. My son-in-law, Ronald, I taught him how to like use my machines. He was so fascinated, and now he's totally into it. So we have this shared love now, and he is now piecing them in his New York apartment. And when he comes to Texas, he finishes them on my long arm. So it's just been lovely because it's just a great art form, and I'm happy to see someone in the family pick it up.
I didn't talk to you about labels. How important are the labels that you find on your quilt tops? I guess you don't find any labels on your quilt tops, do you?
No, no story. So that's so sad. I just think labels are so important. And I label everything. It's pretty rare that I don't label a quilt. And I think I know a lot of art quilters too, even like, stitch their name in the front the way a painter would. And I think, bravo, quilts without a story are kind of lonely. Every quilt needs a story. Interestingly, for my antique quilts like this one and vintage quilts that I've collected. So in my book, I've made up stories for them, because every quilt needs a story. So I quilted them and named them after an ancestor or someone in my family. And I made like a connection to the person I'm naming it after, maybe the block or the quilt variation. And the trip around the world is named after my grandmother who loved to travel, things like that. They all have beautiful labels now and new stories. I called them old quilts and new narratives. Um, but yeah, it's so important. And, it's their living history, really. And it's really important to keep that history and pass it down. So I say label, label, label. No more anonymous quilters.
So, what do you think you should put on your label?
Definitely, the year that it was made and where it was made, I think is really important. And I think if you, obviously the quilter's name, I think if you are using a married name or other surname, that you also put in a maiden name so that somebody can trace your full family history. Those are the basics, just that would tell someone a lot. But if you have room for more, I sometimes put in the materials if there's something unusual that I've used, whether it's like maybe it's an antique fabric from Japan or, something from some other cultural artifact or something. I try to put in some of those as well, little tidbits about the quilt. But I think definitely the place, the time, the year, the name, all of those things are critical.
Do you have a favorite quilt?
Oh man, that's really hard. I have like really eclectic taste. I mentioned Carson Converse. I'm a huge fan of hers. And fan is kind of a squirmy word, but I really respect her art and her expertise. And I feel like in the minimalist world, there's nobody quite like her. And then I'm all the way across the other spectrum. I also really like maximalism. And I've been studying and writing about, and hopefully one day doing a book on Yvonne Wells. And she is an 88-year-old African American in Alabama who does story quilts with tons and tons of applique. And then, of course, the Japanese quilters who have tens of thousands of pieces of applique are also maximalists. So I kind of run the gamut of all different sort of genres. It's hard to pick a favorite.
Just back to your Japanese experience. I'm heading to Japan next year with a crew. And what textile things should people do if they're going to Japan?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Big question.
Yeah. One of my favorite tips to tell people is department store culture in Japan is very much alive. It never died the way it's died in our part of the world. So many of the department stores are like high rises with 10, 12, 20 stories. And those department stores always have a fabric department. They also have a floor of restaurants, which is my second tip. People, if you don't know where to go eat, go to a department store because these are really, really good restaurants, or the department stores will kick them out. Anyway, they all have department fabric stores like we used to have. It's the Sears and the old, 100 years ago. Sometimes they're very garment oriented, but they also have some really, if you dig, some cool fabrics in there, which are fun. And I'd say get out of Tokyo, and kind of get out into some of the other cities. That's really my biggest advice. Many of the museums and things are geared towards silk and kimonos, but they're beautiful ones to go see. There's not as many like quilt shops that you would find as like you would have in the US. There are quilt shops, but they tend to be very small and they're typically sort of paired with a teacher. So you kind of have to know where they are. And then my other big tip is to go to the temple markets, which in the West we would call maybe flea markets or open air markets. And these are held at various temples. The dates all change. And there's some that are really big and some that are, small. But if you can find the date and you have to go really early in the morning, like 6 a.m. to get the good stuff, that's where you're going to find a lot of the antique folk textiles, beautiful cotton, silks, everything, pottery, food. They're amazing. And that's where I've come to them with many empty bags and left with full bags.
I was surprised when I was in the Netherlands that their open air market days is where, all the haberdashery stores show up. They've got these great big carts, and that's where you buy your elastic, your strapping, your buttons, your thread, and
Interesting.
all those things.
Yeah. That's so cool. Most of these are the textile vendors, at least, are antiques. There's a lot of antique dealers there that are selling bits or vintage, like yukata. Yeah, I've had some really fun experiences. There was one time I went, and I would always go really super early. There's one in Kyoto that's like the third Saturday of every month. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. It's the same day every month. And I went, they don't open until, till like 6 a.m. But at 5:45, there was all these women and there was like a cover over these rolls of cotton yukata and they all had their hands under the cover. And I thought, okay, I'm getting in on this. So I went and put my hands, I didn't even know what they were on, but and as soon as he tore off the cover, I just said, okay, I'll take all these. And I took the whole rolls.
Oh, I've done that too.
Yeah, and they were just laughing at me, but none of us were letting go. So it was so much fun.
How
Yeah.
often do you have to say no?
I try not to. It's probably not my best tactic. I like to say yes, and I think I like to solve problems and find a way to get everything done. That's just kind of my way to go. So I try not to say no. So how's that?
Okay. So if people want to get a hold of you for a lecture or get a hold of some of your books or just find out more information, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I have a website. My website is my name, teresaduryea.wong.com. And I'm also on Instagram under Third Floor Quilts, and with the underscore in between the words. So third underscore quilts. So yeah, and anyone can email me, Teresa at Third Floor Quilts as well.
And when will your new book on Kawaii?
Yes, thank you. It comes out in the end of May. It'll be on Amazon and eQuilter will also be carrying it, and people can also find it on my website, and hopefully other quilt shops will have it as well. But we're super excited about this one.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing all your information with us. Boy,
Oh, Karen, thanks so much. It's just been great to talk with you. I enjoyed meeting you at QuiltCon, and it just seems like yesterday, but it's really good to spend some time with you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Teresa Duryea Wong. If you ever have the chance to catch one of her lectures, they are well worth your time. If you are interested in any of her books or contacting her personally, I will leave those links in the video notes below. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting, amazing people on this show. Let one inspire you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.